like the studies of weight loss show that like 98% of people fail. So one, why would we ever give advice that has a 98% failure rate? And two, it's so unfair that when people fail, they get the blame instead of the advice getting the blame, right? Nobody ever says, it's because your stupid eat less, move more advice was really bad. We knew it was bad and we knew you'd fail,
Yeah.
right? Nobody ever says that. People say, oh, you fell off your diet. Well, you know, it's bound to happen, right? And that's the real problem. But if you understand that what the issue is really a hormonal issue, then you can say, well, now what we need to do is look for ways, not to cut calories, because it's not a calorie problem. What we need to do is look for ways to lower insulin, because that's the real issue. And that's what the strategies are, and both you and I use them all the time, right? So cutting out a lot of the sugars and the refined grains and the intermittent fasting is the main strategies, because those are strategies aimed at lowering insulin, not lowering calories.
You know, Doc, when I entered 50 years old, of course, everyone in this country has the adage that, well, the older you get, the fatter you get. And I can tell you at 50, I am leaner, with lower body fat, with more energy, better brain than even when I was in my 20s. You know, how is that possible? Because I'm very, very insulin sensitive. I'm very hormone sensitive because of the things that I practice that you just said. I make sure I eat to full every time I eat, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, when we look at these studies that people live longer when they eat less, we think that people in Okinawa are just simply pushing food away, you know, and eating to, you know, it doesn't work that way. You know, the innate intelligence in the body goes, you know, I'm going to lower my metabolism. I'm starving. I'm starving. I'm starving. You know, but my body knows it's not starving because I'm eating big, full meals. You know, however, I take 18 to 20 hours in between my dinner and my next meal day. You know, and that makes my cells very, very hormone sensitive, and obviously insulin. So when you look at my hormone levels, they're very, very low. However, my cells hear them very well. So I see two parts to this. Insulin, and I want you to discuss this. Obviously, insulin's connection with the cell, which we know inflammation and everything Americans do are driving that sensitivity to become less and less. And obviously too many carbohydrates driving glucose and insulin, making it less and less to be able to hear the hormone. Because people are going to say, okay, what are the strategies that I can get my cells hearing insulin and lower my insulin?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key idea here, and the fatty liver actually and insulin resistance are very, very intimately tied, right? So the idea is that insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance is very important, because insulin is the major driver of obesity. But one of the things that causes the insulin to stay high all the time is insulin resistance. So if you have insulin resistance, then your body normally produces insulin to kind of overcome that resistance, right?
You know, when we say this word resistance, folks, we're talking about the cell not being able to hear insulin well. The receptor to insulin is blunted. And there's multiple reasons, inflammation being one of them, but it can't hear the message. So therefore, you need more and more of the hormone, insulin in this case, to get the message in the cell.
So if you subject the body to kind of constant barrage of a hormone, any hormone, it will develop resistance. So if you, for instance, take a drug, you can use nicotine, or you can use alcohol or marijuana or any of these drugs. You know, the first time you give it, it has a great effect, right? Whatever it is, you get very high or whatever it is. But if you continue to use it constantly, what happens is that effect goes down and down and down.
I have 5 kids, Doc, so I always say it's like yelling at your children. Like when you first start yelling, it works. They go, oh, and they start listening, right? So, but then you notice that you're yelling, you find yourself yelling louder and louder, and they're listening less and less and less. By the time you're screaming at your kids all the time, and they don't even hear you anymore. I said,
that's right.
Of what's happening with hormones, right? More and more insulin. We're challenging insulin. At first, it works, but then it starts working less and less, and then more and more insulin. That's the analogy I love to give.
I love that analogy, actually, because that's exactly what happens in the body. Because if you give and it's not just for insulin, but it's every hormone you can
Every
think
hormone, every
of,
hormone.
even drugs, right? So if you keep giving it all the time, so it needs two things. It needs persistent levels and high levels, right? So if you're yelling with insulin, or whether you're yelling with cocaine or marijuana or morphine, whatever it is, your body eventually stops responding to it. And that's a natural protective mechanism, right? Because it's not used to these high levels, so it has to resist it, right? Just like more yelling. But that's not the answer. That's actually the wrong answer, because you can see that, to use your example, the more you yell, the less response you get, right? Exactly, and it's a vicious cycle, because you yell more, they respond less. So you yell even more, and they respond even less. The actual answer is to use much less. And insulin is the same. So insulin resistance is actually caused by too much insulin.
Absolutely.
Not only too high, but persistently high. So as you use insulin all the time, then your body becomes less sensitive to it. As you become less sensitive to it, or become more resistant, your body produces more insulin to overcome that resistance, right? But that's exactly the wrong response. You want to use less. So you either have to cut down the amount, the level, or the persistence of those levels. And that's what the intermittent fasting does. It provides you with that long period of very low insulin. So that means your body stays insulin sensitive.
That's right.
That's the key, because if insulin resistance is what's causing your high insulin level, it's not your diet anymore. And this is why people who have been obese for 20 years have a lot of trouble losing that weight, because it's a time-dependent phenomenon, right? And this is what people have to understand, that it's the insulin resistance that is keeping your insulin levels high. But the answer is not to give more insulin, just like in diabetes. The answer is not to give more. The answer is to give much, much, much less. And this is the thing. If you believe in calories, or even if you just believe in carbohydrates, if it's all carbohydrates or if it's all calories that drives obesity, then it should be the same whether you want to lose weight and you've been overweight for 15 years, or if you've been overweight for 15 days. You should be able to lose weight the same. But everybody knows it's not the same. The guy who's been overweight for 15 days drops it like that, right? The guy who's been overweight for 15 years has a hell of a time, because they've been going around that insulin resistance, cycle, high insulin, insulin resistance cycle for so long that they need to get that fixed. And that's why the intermittent fasting is really such a powerful method, because it's not simply the diet. Now you're dealing with, so diet is a major factor in keeping insulin levels high, right? But it's the insulin resistance, and that's where we've gone off the track, right? If you go back to our dietary habits in the mid-70s, there was actually two major changes. So one, we went to a very low-fat diet, which was a mistake, right? Because the fat has a lot of calories, so we said, well, you should cut your fat and all this kind of stuff, and everybody kind of knows about that already. But the second change that nobody ever talks about is that we went from an average of 3 meals a day, so breakfast, lunch, dinner. I grew up in the 70s. So you tried to have a snack and your mom said, forget it, right? You're going to ruin your dinner, right?
Absolutely.
But now we've gone in the mid-2000s to an average of 5 to 6 meals a day. So you look at your kids and they're all breakfast, snack, lunch, snack, dinner, snack, right? And that's normal, right? And that's the average, right? So that's insane. So now we've actually set into motion the exact two things that we need for insulin resistance. We need high levels, in which we've done that with very high insulin foods like, refined grains, right? We've cut out the fat and ate more bread, right? That's the base of the food pyramid, was the bread, right?
That's right.
And the second thing we did, which is what you need for resistance, is the persistence of those levels. So now people say you got to eat the minute you wake up, right? Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, right? And eat 5-6 times a day, constantly snack. So now you've got not only the high levels, but you've got the persistently high levels. Now you have set the stage for insulin to be high, insulin resistance to be high, and you're a sitting duck for obesity and type 2 diabetes, right? So the answer is to do what you do, which is give your body a break, right?